Welcome to Succession Stories, Insights for Next Generation Entrepreneurs. I'm Lori Barkman. I've spent my career bringing an entrepreneurial approach to mature companies struggling with change. As an outside executive of a third-generation, 120-year-old company, I was part of a long-term succession plan. Now I work with entrepreneurs, privately held companies, and family businesses to develop innovations that create enterprise value and transition plans to achieve their long-term goals. On this podcast, listen in while I talk with entrepreneurs who are driving innovation and culture change. I speak with owners who successfully transition their company and others who experience disappointment along the way. Guests also include experts in multi-generational businesses and entrepreneurship. If you are a next-generation entrepreneur looking for inspiration to grow and thrive, or an owner who can't figure out the best way to transition their closely held company, this podcast is for you. Subscribe to our newsletter for more resources to build value in your business. Visit small.big.com. That's small.big.com and sign up today. This past year, some high-profile companies put a spotlight on succession, most notably Amazon and Apple. Only 42% of small to mid-sized businesses have succession plans, and just 2 out of 10 companies say their succession planning is effective. This week, I talked with Beth Miller, founder of Executive Velocity, a leadership development and succession planning advisor, about how to avoid succession planning mistakes in closely held companies. Beth shares helpful insights for do's and don'ts and ways to formalize an approach for talent management. Beth, welcome to Succession Stories. I'm really glad to have you on today.
Well, thank you. I've really been looking forward to this, Lori.
It's great to talk with you because you have such amazing experience working with executives in coaching and advising and succession planning. And a lot of what I heard from my audience when I asked them for questions, certainly there were questions about COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the other set of questions were around leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I thought it'd be great to have you on today to talk about those two things. But let's start with you. If you can start by telling me about your path, because you created your own company, you created your own consulting company, but that wasn't right out of the gate. So I'm curious to hear your story about how you decided to do that.
Well, actually, the reason I started the company, Executive Velocity, was because my husband had started a company years prior, and he had convinced me to leave Coopers & Lybrand and start a consulting division. He was doing accounting temporary services firms. So he's really the entrepreneur, not me. We sold the business back in 2002, and I got bored pretty quickly and decided to look for something new. But I also knew that working on my own for so long that the idea of going to work for somebody again was just not in the cards. So I was talking to a friend of mine here in Atlanta who had been a member of Vistage, which is a CEO membership international organization. And he really credited the organization and the group that he was in to the growth of his company, which at the time when he started was like $2 or $3 million. And when I was having conversation with him, it was over 100 million. So, I mean, serious growth. And fast forward, I became a Vistage chair back in 2006 and really found my passion of working with smaller companies. Those companies generally are 30 employees, upwards of 300 to 400 employees, and helping them build leadership pipelines. The work I did with Vistage also included business consulting. Because I had run a company before, I had run into a lot of the same issues that they had. So I could really be empathetic and also help them navigate through some of those issues. But the group obviously helped as well. The coaching that I did led me to realize that I wanted to learn more about coaching and developing leaders. So I became certified as a coach and then went and became certified in a number of assessment tools, including Myers-Briggs, Hogan, and EQI, which actually I just recently got certified in. I'd been using the book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 out of Talent Smart, but then moved to assessment tool called EQI. And emotional intelligence is a huge factor in leadership success. And I am often called in to coach because of some gap in emotional intelligence. In fact, I was just talking to a new client the other day, and the woman that I'll be coaching has some challenges around managing her emotions and also adapting to the needs of others. So, yeah.
Boy, that's not relatable, right? I'm sure everybody in the audience is probably shaking their head going, yeah, okay, we get it. Who doesn't have complete control of their emotions?
Right. Exactly.
Well, those sound like really interesting attributes and things that you can do to help develop leadership and help people look in the mirror to see what do they need to work on.
Right.
That's step one, just admitting, hey, this is an issue of mine.
Yes. Self-awareness. Yes.
Self-awareness.
And that's something I always look for that when I have initial conversations with new coachees is, if they're not self-aware, there are going to be challenges in making adjustments and changes to their behavior.
Tell me more about that. How do you get them to be self-aware?
So one way is through 360 assessments. Now, that's a challenge in smaller companies that, have, less than 50 employees because you're not going to get enough data to support the feedback. But 360s can be very beneficial, and it provides individuals with a 360 feedback, meaning that they're getting feedback from their peers, their direct reports, from their managers, collaborators, in some situations, even their clients, customers. I'm doing a couple right now where the leader has asked a number of their clients for feedback, which I think is a great way to get full feedback.
Yeah, especially if it's independent and hopefully it's anonymous feedback because the client might feel that they can't truly be honest otherwise.
Yeah, and it is all confidential and anonymous. The individual just gets a aggregated score, so they're not able to see who's saying what.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that oftentimes they will read comments. They'll go, well, I think that was so-and-so. I'll say, well, does it really matter? Because it's feedback.
Right.
This additional information that you should be taking in.
Well, and there's two things you can do with feedback. There's the circular file.
Yes.
There's the trash can. And then there's to take it to heart.
Yeah.
And there's probably something in between. Do you find that people really, even if they're getting it in black and white on paper that this is feedback, do they have a tough time believing it or internalizing it?
Sometimes it depends on the feedback. I remember working with one individual, and he got some really tough feedback, and it was a surprise to him. But he took it to heart, and he realized that, this was perception of the people that were giving him the feedback, and that, that's reality to them. So he needed to figure out how to adjust and adapt to the styles of other people.
Right.
Yeah.
So the show theme, as the name insinuates, with succession stories. Yeah. Well, I love to talk about transitions and succession. Mm-hmm. And succession can be in a general company setting. It doesn't have to be a family business.
Right.
But I'm curious if you've seen any differences with working with clients of those two categories, where it's a privately held company, maybe founder-led, versus this is second generation, third generation, et cetera.
Right. I have found that family businesses are a bigger challenge. You've got, personalities have known each other for years. There's more emotion involved, and there are alliances that can come into play. In fact, I was just talking to a gentleman earlier this morning who is in a family business, and I think he's third generation. And he's having to deal with a lot of the problems that occurred in earlier generations that he feels like he's having to clean up because the family itself wasn't willing to make the hard decisions as it related to elevating family members and placing them in positions that either they weren't ready for or they were never going to be ready for.
And that's a tough thing to tell someone they're never going to be ready.
Yeah.
I heard someone yesterday, I was on a webinar, and some family business owners, some of them had sold their company.
Mm-hmm.
One gentleman told a story about he had to let go one of his sons because the son wasn't performing.
Yeah.
And it took about 6 months. And then after he let his son go, it took another 3 months for emotions to kind of subside. And then he said after that, everything was fine because it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing for the son. And the son ended up going to create his own business. He's entrepreneurial and he found his path somewhere else. But it's really tough to make that call.
Yeah, it is. Parent and child relationship is, so close, and, you don't want to hurt your child, but at the same time, long term, in this case, in a lot of cases, it's a much better choice because oftentimes those kids are in the business sometimes because they feel obligated, that they didn't really have a choice. I have actually a friend/client over in Louisiana, and one of the things that he was really good about in bringing his kids on board was that they couldn't just immediately come to work for him. They had to get a degree that made sense with what they were doing, which was an engineering company. They had to go off and work 5 years somewhere else before they actually came to work for the organization. And that's worked very well for him.
Yeah, I've heard that too, where people need to go work elsewhere before entering the family business.
Yep.
And then there's a path for them, hopefully, with mentoring. I've heard that's a really important aspect.
Yeah, mentoring and coaching, I find, are really important in small to mid-sized companies for developing. But it's really important that you have a really strong development plan and to understand, what are the competencies that the individual's bringing to the table, and what are those competencies that he or she may be missing that need to be developed, and to be developed in a timeline that will prepare them for their next position in the right time frame.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the process of succession planning, can you just explain at a high level how it works? Is it something that's, done in a day, done in a year, 5 years? How does it work?
So the succession planning process is an ongoing process, and you need to integrate it with your business plan and your business planning process. So the succession plan should be a subset of your business plan. It needs to be driven by what I call the succession planning team, which is a high-level group of leaders, along with an HR talent management person who understands the process and can facilitate what I call the talent discussions, the talent conversations, where you bring the team together and discuss potential versus performance. That's one big mistake I see smaller businesses make, is they get confused with high performers and high potentials, and they don't equate. In fact, I read somewhere where it's like 1 out of 7 high performers actually have the traits of high potentials. So you got to be really clear of what potential is in your organization. And that's forward looking versus performance, which is past and historical looking. So get really clear about that, and then have the conversation around who is a high performer, high potential. Where are they in the organization? Are they in a key position? That's another mistake that I see people make, and that is they look at the key employees versus the key positions first. The conversation I was having just earlier with this gentleman in the family business, they did create a future organizational chart, but there were no names in it. All right, and there were people that actually were in some of those positions, and then some of those positions don't even exist yet. They're going to be needed in 2 or 3 years. So they have this kind of map that they then need to start placing employees into the map. but it also requires development. So the development, if you've got, for instance, if you've got a controller and you believe that you need a CFO in a year or so, there are some clear skills gaps between a controller and a CFO. So what kind of development are you going to provide that individual so that he or she can move into that position versus you having to go out and hire somebody? There's a tool that's called a 9-box grid, which is one of the key tools to use. And that basically, one axis is performance, the other axis is potential. And in the talent conversation, you start plotting your employees in this 9-box grid. Then what you do is you then move those names to the key positions. And you're able to then start seeing, okay, we might have 1 or 2 people that are available for this position in the future. How do we start developing them? So the development is ongoing. And then you're continually measuring the performance and the development of those individuals to align with your succession plan. So if you've got somebody that you feel is going to retire in 5 years, well, you've got 5 years to develop that individual or individuals. If you're lucky enough where you've got 2 or 3 people, you've got a larger organization, then you are measuring them as they develop. And it's a continual talent conversation.
I love how you've described that. And I think there's a couple of key things here. One is that a succession plan is a subset of the overall strategy plan or business plan.
Yeah.
And that's a point that I like to reinforce with the audience, that it doesn't sit alone.
Right.
And the way you described it was so great, because you're right. You have to be future thinking. You can't just look at someone's past performance and say that that's an indicator of future. It's certainly important, but if the future skill set or if the role is just so different for that individual, you really have to figure that out. There might be a gap. And that was my experience too, when I worked for a very, very large company that people would know the name of if they heard of it, but they have an excellent process and they use the 9-box.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that with our teams to talk about future potential. So I can visualize that. And I'll include a link to that in the show notes for folks that maybe aren't familiar with the 9-box grid. But sort of transitioning here on the talent side or the employee side, do you find that typically they are in the loop, that they know that there's this grander plan being discussed about them?
No. I think part of it is people or leaders are concerned that, if they start having this conversation around, well, we want to prepare you for this next position and things don't go right, then they've got to have a more difficult conversation. What I encourage companies to do is, first of all, to communicate to all employees about what potential looks like to the organization. What are the behaviors that they are looking for in employees that would show them that they have potential to either move up or across and take on some other role that will expand their career? It doesn't have to be up. And I think that's really important, especially today where there's so many companies that are a lot flatter. And you need to, instead of looking at the performance and the pathway of an employee up, it could be a latticed effect where they're moving across and up, or you're enriching their job, where you're expanding what they already have with adding on additional responsibilities. That may mean a larger team. So it's not just about moving up.
But I think the conversation really, we could sort of debate this. I guess there's no one answer. But for high potential people who are really contributing at a high level in an organization, they kind of want to know what their future entails at that organization. Otherwise, they might say, I'm going to move on to greener pastures. I'm looking for more opportunity. So there's a push and a pull on that.
Yeah. And, I definitely encourage career conversations with all employees, whether they're, your average performer or high performer, high potential. And those career conversations will allow you to understand what are they looking for, and then how can you help them get there. The critical thing is to make sure that you don't make promises that you can't keep.
That is the point.
Yeah.
So you're talking about their career intention, what they aspire to, their hopes and dreams,
right?
But not promising you're going to be VP or you're going to be CEO unless it's really in the cards for them.
Right. Yeah. And, there are some high potentials out there that don't really want to take on another higher level position, oftentimes for personal reasons. They're at a point where they feel like they need to step back. There might be something going on in their personal life. You need to understand where they are in their lives before you assume that, oh gosh, here's this high potential. We need to move him or her into that next position. It might also mean, requiring a lot more travel, and maybe they're not up for that. There's all sorts of aspects to their personal decision.
Switching gears a little bit to talk about COVID-19 and the impact that you've seen on small businesses, medium-sized businesses, that they've had to deal with changes in this new environment. Maybe they've had to lay off key employees that they wouldn't otherwise have done, 6 months ago. What have you seen on the talent side in terms of impact to companies?
Yeah. I've seen both sides, meaning I've seen some people where they've actually been hiring. I was just talking to a gentleman out in California. They do large HVAC systems. So they do engineering and actual construction, and they've been hiring. There've been other smaller organizations that have had to let go, and they've seen that opportunity, and they've been able to take on new talent. Now, on average, that's not what's happening right now. Unfortunately, it's more the reverse, where people are having to downsize as they wait for the economy to rebound, and that's having to let go of anybody, whether or not it's for performance or not, is difficult. It's especially difficult when individuals, it's totally out of their control. And, we're all dealing with COVID, and we're all being impacted some way. So the conversations that they're having, they're trying to do it oftentimes with furloughs versus letting people go. But they're now at a point where I see them making some final decisions. We're 6 months in, they furloughed people, and now they're feeling like, okay, PPP's running out. I need to make some decisions in order for the good of the organization to be healthy.
And these are tough decisions that companies are making. Like you said, is it performance-based? Is it tenure-based? It's probably maybe a combination of things. And it's hard to know, but I wonder about the impact on the remaining people in the organization, right? They might feel guilty that they have their job and their colleagues don't. They might be sad. There's a lot of emotion there. Mm-hmm. We started this conversation talking about the emotional quotient, the EQ.
Yes.
What kinds of conversations have you been having with CEOs and leaders of these companies to help them through the emotional side of COVID?
Yeah. Well, one of the issues that I see as it relates to the leaders specifically is they're exhausted. They've used up a lot of their emotional energy reserves, and they need to be able to step back and regenerate. I spend a lot of time with them exploring how do you, in short periods of time, get some time for yourself and be able to kind of balance the needs of your employees with the needs of yourself. It's the old adage of put the oxygen mask on first before you try and help somebody else. And if if leaders can't help themselves, how do they have the energy to help others? And there's some that have been struggling with that. They're the ones generally that are in those smaller organizations that have some really huge financial strains, and it's almost like they're on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really difficult to have those conversations with them. Really hard.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they're feeling on the edge financially, they're probably losing sleep. They're not, eating, taking care of themselves. And then that's just going to be a downward spiral.
And their decisions aren't as good either because they're cloudy. They've got all this other stuff around them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, that's not a good place to be. The organizations that are finding a way through that, getting the balance sheet squared away, having the capital that they need to be able to move forward, and then thinking about what's next, they're the ones that are going to come out of this and be more, ready to take on what the marketplace dynamic looks like over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and I've also seen something else with those those companies, and they're a lot more agile.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking at the landscape and saying, okay, what opportunities am I missing that I could go after that maybe I didn't in the past because I didn't need to, but now there are market opportunities there that I probably should pursue.
Yeah. And then that fits back with what's the need in the organization. Maybe they need people who are more intrapreneurial or entrepreneurial.
Exactly.
Whereas in the past it was, hey, do this, do it well. This is how it works.
Yeah.
And now it's more about what new services might we need? What new products might we need? How do we talk to our customers?
Yeah.
So I think then again, it stitches back to the strategic plan. And I think it's a great time for organizations to take that step back. I led a session the other week, and at the end, we recapped and said, how did you feel about today? And it was words like energetic, positive, looking ahead, like things like that,
Yeah.
Whereas probably a week ago or 2 weeks ago, it still would have been more status quo. And, I'm working from home. Then they were connected with their team. They were feeling this hopeful sense of moving forward. And I think now more than ever, it is a great time to kind of bring the teams together and talk about what's next.
Right.
What can we do to be adaptive and, as you said, agile?
Mm-hmm.
It's a really important thing. And as they think about the type of leadership they need, they might be modifying that skill set.
Right. That, they need to find leaders that are agile, right? And willing to change and have that vision for the future.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah.
Let's talk about values. I think values drive behavior.
Yes.
And certainly incentives and alignment in an organization. And regardless of whether it's a family business or not, they need values to have as the pillar or the foundation.
Yes.
How have your clients' company values driven their decisions at this time during the pandemic?
I think the ones that are the strongest from an organizational standpoint are always going back to their values and asking the question, okay, does this decision match our values? And that, they have that conversation as a group, as a leadership team. They drive values through the organization on a really consistent basis. The gentleman in California was talking about they're a fairly new organization. They've only been around for about 6 years, but they've managed to grow really very significantly. And he had a little brochure that had the mission, the vision, the values, and then the specific behaviors, which I thought was excellent, because a lot of companies will have their values, but then they don't drive it down to what are the behaviors that show us that you are representing the values. And so he had a list. It was pretty specific, and all the managers had those. And what he's doing is he is bringing out one of those values in each meeting and reinforcing it as they're making decisions. So that's a great way of doing it, I thought.
Yeah, it's a great way. I like that a lot. I worked for a company that did that. It specifically called out all of those elements: mission, vision, values, and behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for one of the companies I worked for, safety was one of the values.
Mm-hmm.
And safety was certainly one of the behaviors. And anytime they had an important leadership meeting, they would make sure to mention, where the safety exits were. I mean, you could take it at any level, manufacturing or an office environment.
Yes.
But if you think about COVID-19,
mm-hmm.
if safety is one of your values, it will certainly drive the behaviors and decisions about working in the working environment and how they treat their staff and their clients and how to protect them. So I think that call out about behaviors is a really good one. The only other thing I wanted to mention about that as you were talking, I was thinking about this two-way street nature of behavior, because you can't outline the behaviors and then have the leadership team not abiding by that, because people see that a mile away and they'll call it out.
Right. Oh, yeah. They need to definitely model the behaviors that they're insisting others do as well. Yeah. And then, from a succession planning standpoint, I always then take a look at those behaviors and help an organization create those competencies that are related to the behaviors, because that then helps you in the conversation around performance and potential. And it also helps you in your hiring process. If you're clear about the competencies that anybody or everybody needs within the organization, then you can have really good questions to ask potential employees, candidates for positions.
Yeah, they definitely tie back.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And on a different show, I'm going to talk to an executive recruiter who works with family businesses. So this is a great segue to this next episode that we'll have. And I'll make sure to tie them together in the show notes. So competencies is important. And I think that this is probably a great place to talk about you and your business, and how do people find you online if they want to learn more about succession planning, competency development, and leadership?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, which they would look me up as Beth Armknecht Miller, which is ARMKNECHT. I'm the only one there at Beth Armknecht Miller. And then my website is executive-velocity.com. I have a lot of free resources on my website. Just go to the resource tab, and I've got resources on hiring, leadership, and succession planning. So, help yourself to all the resources out there.
Oh, well, thank you. That's awesome to have people want to learn more about succession planning. I know there's no one way to do it, but if there's a lot of best practices that you're sharing, that's a great resource. So last question for you, because you're a business owner and you are an entrepreneur. Do you have a favorite saying about entrepreneurship?
Oh, gosh. Probably, I guess it would be something around, if you think you know what you're doing today, wait for tomorrow.
Because it's always going to change.
Exactly.
Change is constant.
That's right.
That's great. Beth, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I so enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Innovation, transition, growth. Easy to say, but hard to do. If you're an entrepreneur facing these challenges, I get it. I work with businesses from small to big to achieve your vision. Visit smalldotbig.com to learn more. I'd love to connect with you. Subscribe to Succession Stories, and if you enjoy the show, please share a rating and review. Thanks for listening.